So hello and welcome to today's CEU webinar offered only to ILFI's member community. I'll be turning it over to our speakers for today after a few short announcements. While we're getting started, please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat and include where you're calling in from. I will go ahead and get us started. My name is Liz Harder. I am ILFI's Member Engagement Director, and I'm calling in from St. Paul, Minnesota. And we encourage everyone to use the Zoom chat liberally today. Please note that the webinar will not include an audience Q&A, but we do encourage you to use the chat to connect with each other and ask questions that maybe other members can help answer. Today's webinar is part of a series that we're running this week, covering case studies from each Petal or performance area of the Living Building Challenge. Be sure to sign up for the other webinars this week. And if you can't make any others, don't worry, they'll be available in the member dashboard after we wrap up. Now, to quickly cover some of the CEUs that you're earning by being here today. Our objectives for today's webinar is to learn about the intent and requirements of the LBC Energy and Materials Petals. We are going to learn about strategies and resources for achieving each of those petals from the PAE Living Building and Burwood Brickworks project team members. By attending today's webinar, you're earning 1 LFA general credit and 1 AIA LU HSW. And instructions for CEU reporting for AIA and LFA will be included in an email that I'll send to everyone after the webinar. So with that, I will hand it over to Lisa Carey Moore, ILFI's Buildings Team Director, to introduce the Energy Petal.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. As Liz said, my name is Lisa, and I'm the director of the Buildings team, so I oversee the entire life cycle of the building certification process. And today, I'm really excited to introduce the Energy Petal. For those of you who don't know about our Energy Petal, the intent of the Petal is to treat energy as a precious resource. Electrification and efficiency are the first steps to ensure that the needs of this generation are not exploiting the potential for future generations to address their own. By ensuring a best-in-class energy use profile and removing fossil fuel emissions, our buildings are showing code officials and policymakers what's possible. Embodied carbon is also a focus of the Petal because we now understand that no matter how efficient and renewable our energy, there are impacts associated with the products we employ. Life cycle analysis provides visibility for teams to make better decisions around primary material reductions and to select interior products that are better than those typically found in the market. All projects must account for total embodied carbon associated with their projects from resource extraction through the construction process stage by purchasing a one-time qualified embodied carbon offset. This means that in selecting products, the design team plays an important role to ensure better embodied carbon outcomes as much as they have a role to play in ensuring healthier materials under the materials Petal. Resiliency is also at the foundation of this Petal. Most practitioners who participate in our requirements understand that a volatile climate means more impactful weather events that can make the places we work, visit, and reside in more vulnerable unless they're designed to address these events from time to time. Thus, all projects must develop and incorporate a resilient strategy to allow the buildings to be habitable for 1 week or otherwise participate in support for the local community in a disaster. I'm excited to turn it over to Mark, who will highlight how PAE is maximizing the impact of the Energy Petal through cutting-edge technologies and by fostering innovative partnerships to create off-site renewables. Thanks, Mark.
All right, let me share my screen. Everybody see that? Okay, well, I'll get started. Yeah, thanks for having me. This presentation is about the PAE Living Building and the Energy Petal, and we'll talk about some of the challenges that we faced during during the design to achieve this, and then some of the solutions that we came up with and lessons learned along the way. My name is Mark Bruni. I'm a mechanical principal at PAE. I was the project manager for this project from the start to the end, and I'm always happy right now to share the lessons that we learned from this project so that we can all get better together and hopefully build a lot more projects like this, because I personally believe this is what the world needs right now. So our project is a 58,000 square foot office building in Portland, Oregon. We completed it in 2021, so a couple of years ago now. It has been more than 85% leased out and occupied since September of last year. So we've got, right now we have about 14 months of net positive operation that we're really proud of. It's the only project also that we're aware of that was developed in the same model as a typical developer-led building. So we're calling this a developer-driven model, and something we're excited about as far as a repeatability of this project. Oh, sorry, here we go. So just want to dive in quickly, a little bit of context about where the project is. I'll tour you through the building, kind of a lightning tour through the building so you understand a little bit about what it is inside. And then I'll dive into some of the ways that we achieved net positive energy and the challenges we had along the way. We start all of our building tours in our lobby, and we have this carving in there as an acknowledgement of the land that the building sits on, which is the unceded territory of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of the Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Malala tribes. Native Americans have been living here on this land for over 12,000 years. And today, Portland has the nation's 9th largest Native American population. Portland itself was founded about 170 years ago, so kind of a blink of the eye in comparison to the Native American history. There's been one other building sitting on our site since then, which was the Reed Block, highlighted here. It was torn down in the middle of last century, and the site had been a parking lot since then. Today, our building looks something like this, with light rail running in front of it, great street walkability to the rest of downtown, and sort of contributing to the urban fabric now. As you come in, you see that carving's kind of your first glimpse walking in through the lobby. You start to see some of the mass timber structure. And if you go through the door on the right, you start to walk up our main stairwell, which was designed with mass timber stair structure, relights at each floor, and a little bit more depth, kind of grace in the stairs to try to really entice people to choose the stairs over the elevator if they can. Coming out through the 3rd floor, you enter into our lobby, PAE's lobby, and you'll see the first of 3 biophilic murals that we have on the wall that take some cues from Oregon's key biomes. You'll see the concrete floor, and you'll feel the warmth or the coolness, depending on the season, that the building's radiant system emits from that floor. Turning 90 degrees, you'll see our front desk, which was made from some of the wood of the street trees that had to be harvested at site to build the building. In the background there, the windows are automated, and those open and close automatically to manage our natural ventilation when it's available. From a smell standpoint, you'll smell a really fresh space because there's no carpet. We've built to meet the red list, and the difference in indoor air quality is subtle, but I think it's perceptible. Kind of going around the corner, you'll see, our open office space. It's usually a lot livelier than this, but it's an open desk plan, and we hot desk, so everyone can sit anywhere. We can thermally migrate, which has been really great. One thing you won't see much of is ductwork. Our air system is ventilation only, and that allowed for a really light touch in terms of exposed ductwork in the ceiling. And the key to this was really careful management of our loads during the design process so that we can make the radiant floor really do the heavy lifting for heating and cooling. The facades you see here are actually just under 30% glazed. It's double paned fiberglass windows. The solar heat gain coefficient is 0.27, an assembly value of 0.24 for the U value. So just a really tight envelope to keep those loads low and let the radiant floor do the work for us. Up at the top level, we call this space the Decany. It's our indoor-outdoor space that's really starting to serve as kind of a living room for Portland's sustainable design community, which has been just great to see. So that's the lightning tour through the building. Now you kind of understand a little bit about what the building is. I want to dive into the LBC and specifically the energy Petal. So our goal for the building was full certification of all 7 petals, so place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. And we coined this an unofficial 8th petal that we call net positive financial. And really, this was a nod to the developer pro forma that we were being held to, and the fact that the building had investors who were expecting about a 10% return on their investment. And our hope was really to show that living building challenge projects can be just as financially sustainable as they are environmentally. And it's really interesting now because we're post-COVID. Our building is 85% leased out, which is much, much better than a lot of different buildings in downtown Portland, which I think also kind of speaks to that value proposition of living building challenge. So let's dive into the energy systems. This is a drone image of our building here, and there were 2 big challenges that we had on energy that I want to address. And the first is that we were building in a historic district. We're in the Old Town district of Portland, and we had to meet the requirements of that district. And what our historic commission told us is that they would not accept any photovoltaic equipment visible from the street. And that set some significant limitations on how much PV we could put on the roof. Also, this is the second limitation, our utility had restrictions about how much we could backfeed to the grid. At first, we thought we couldn't backfeed anything at all. We did, however, negotiate with them, and we agreed to a backfeed limit of about 50 kilowatts to the utility. The PV array you see on the roof is 133 kW PV array, so nearly 4 times that backfeed limit. It fills about 80% of the roof area, and it provides roughly 9 EUIs worth of power for our building. On the energy use side, this diagram illustrates the mechanical system that's responsible for most of the energy that's used in our building. What you see is on the roof, we have air source heat pump condensing units. And the choice to use those was really driven by our developer-led model. We couldn't afford ground-coupled heat pumps. That was going to add another almost $500,000 to the project. Our heat pump system, instead, the air source heat pump system, we used heats and cools water that we circulate through the radiant floors. In the shoulder seasons, we cool with natural ventilation via our automated windows. We've got heat recovery ventilators that supplement some of the heating and cooling and provide ventilation air. All in all, this system uses about 17 EUI worth of energy to operate. So really, really low, but still more than we could generate on site, given the roof constraints from the historic district and the utility. So given that we had this gap in energy production need and what we could make, this was really one of the primary challenges for our project to figure out how are we going to solve this. And the interesting thing was that the answer was found in a different problem that we have in our community. That's the affordable housing crisis. So Portland has about 4,000 people that are living on the streets right now, another 2,000 in some form of transitional housing. So affordable housing is really top of mind as part of the solution to fix this problem in Portland and a lot of our communities. Our general contractor, Walsh Construction, was building an affordable housing project in North Portland at the same time that we were in design on our project. And we were able to make an arrangement with Reach, the owner of that development, to actually donate an array to them that met the additional needs of solar for our building. So that was how we got to our additionality. So what we have now is we have 2 arrays. We have one on-site at the PAE Living Building, and then an off-site array at Reach Renaissance Commons. On-site, we use a battery and microgrid to manage that power feedback and stay within the 50 kW limit that the utility set for us. Limits like these, by the way, are pretty common in a lot of downtown cores throughout the country. So this is a common thing. And our design is really to charge our battery up. We have the battery and the microgrid. When we've got more power than we can backfeed, we charge the battery. And then when we're not generating power, at night, for example, then we slowly discharge that battery back to the grid within that feedback limit. And if the battery can't accept any more power, then the microgrid controls the solar to curtail that solar. That is, it shuts the solar off so that we don't overfeed the grid. I'll get back to that in a second. So remember this curtailment piece, because I'll get back to that. That was one of our challenges in operation. So this image shows the final result of our offsite array. This is the Reach Renaissance Commons building. It now has a 215 kilowatt solar array, produces more than $20,000 worth of electricity for Reach, for the affordable housing project every year. So that's like a donation to them basically every year. This generates enough power for about 12 EUI worth of energy for us, so 12,000 BTUs per square foot per year. So between our two arrays, now we have about 20 EUIs worth of power production. Reach keeps the value of this energy, so essentially that donation to them, and they retire the renewable energy credits on our behalf. At the PAE Living Building, we actually purchase renewable energy from the grid so that net, there's enough renewable energy for both of our projects to legitimately say we're using renewable energy. But for PAE, we have the additionality that we need on PV. So this was a really huge win, I think, for a lot of different parties. For us, for the PAE Living Building, we had a home for the solar that we couldn't incorporate on our site, but we needed to get to net positive energy. Reach and its tenants had an obvious benefit from reduced energy costs. City of Portland and the utility both got a little bit closer to their climate goals ahead of schedule. And then as a development team, we all get sort of the great PR of being, having a fantastic project that we just did, and also really, making a contribution to our community. And it was interesting because it didn't happen very easily. The contract to do this with Reach was pretty difficult to figure out. The energy incentives through our local incentive program were something we're still trying to pin down because it just doesn't fit any of their models. Finding Reach was a bit of a lucky stroke for us. And then financially, this was something we had to build into our developer-led pro forma. So it was one more cost we had to absorb. There was a synergy between the equitable investment Petal for LBC also. So that was helpful. In the future, as I look at this, I hope that we can find more partnerships and maybe something where all of the parties that benefit from this can contribute to it to make this easier, make it kind of open to more projects. I want to close out with a little bit of a look at last year's performance. We're at about 110% net positive, so meeting our goals, but had a few challenges along the way. There's a few charts I'm going to kind of run through with our current performance. This chart shows the actual energy use versus our model. So the model is the green line on top, the gray bars are every month's actual energy use. And what you can see is we're performing pretty well. We're using about 85% of our anticipated energy. Some of that delta is due to conservatism we had built into our model, just so that, conservative assumptions. And also from fewer people coming into the office on a day-to-day basis now, sort of post-COVID, where we have more remote staff. So that's fewer computers really being plugged in. The effect of that occupancy, I think, is relatively modest, though, because we're still heating and cooling and lighting all of the spaces. So it's really just that laptop energy change that's different than what we anticipated. This is a chart of the annual production at the offsite array at Reach Renaissance Commons. And you can see it's really close to what we anticipated. The overage that you see where we're actually overproducing May, June, July of last year, or this year, is I think actually due to the fact that we added more panels at the end. We added another 10 kW to the array as we kind of realized we might want a little bit more buffer. So kind of the takeaway from this is that a normal solar installation is pretty easy to predict how much energy you're going to get from it. You'll be pretty close. It's a very different story at the PAE Living Building. We had some really significant struggles here getting our array and our microgrid fully operational, and we're still working through these. The trouble in our case had to do with that utility backfeed limitation. So our battery system once installed, couldn't actually meet the utilities requirements for backfeed. And the second problem we had was that the microgrid system communications were a little too slow in curtailment to closely follow the building's dynamic loads as the PV power goes up and building power goes down. With that 50 kW limit, we had to really tightly monitor that. And so the result was that our system ran in a highly curtailed mode until pretty recently. So we had a lot of our PV actually shut off. And that's kind of where on the left side, you see there's a really big gap from the green line that we anticipated to what we were getting. And we're starting to close that gap now. Back in July, we finally fixed some of those communication issues. And so that's why our performance is now much closer to the green line. The battery upgrades are still in process, actually, that are going to allow our system to meet that utility feedback limit. So hopefully by early next year, our battery will be fully operational. We'll actually have the yellow bars touching the green line. The good news is that we had enough safety factor built in, and with our energy use being a little bit lower than anticipated, that we're still achieving 110% net positive energy operation over the last 12 months. So the big lessons learned here for everybody is, that safety factors, as you're sort of figuring out how much PV to put on, are really important. Our design was for initially a 10% safety factor. And then in our developer-led performance, that got kind of crunched down to about a 5% safety factor at the end of design. So make sure you maintain that, try to shoot for 10%. And also that microgrid system and batteries, they take a lot of commissioning. We've spent a lot of time working through those, trying to make them work. So that's on the energy generation side. Just a couple of last slides on the performance perspective. The radiant floors are working really, really well. The design with low loads to sort of a near passive level operation, and then heating and cooling from the floor makes for a really comfortable space, and people have been very happy with that. We started doing an experiment with a warm quadrant on the 4th floor up in the upper right-hand corner. We actually warmed that up a little bit to allow people to thermally migrate if they like it a little bit warmer in the winter, which has been working really well. And then we had an interesting situation last winter, actually, where one of the radiant floor zone's control wires were accidentally disconnected, and they stayed disconnected for several weeks. And we found out about it not because anyone complained about being cold, but because we were doing an audit of the space with a thermal image camera, and we saw that the floors weren't on. So I think it just really speaks to that designing for low loads, designing with mass in there. The fact that nobody even noticed that the floor was off in the middle of winter just really speaks to that, what you get out of a tight envelope. I know we don't have any questions that we can ask here, but that was what I had to talk about. So I suppose if there are questions, feel free to reach out to me personally sometime, and I would be happy to answer them.
Mark, that was awesome. Thank you so very much. And folks, please feel free to drop into the chat any questions you might have for Mark while he is here today. Next up, we have the materials petal. Materials petal is based on the premise that our environment and our health would be best served by a building materials marketplace founded on transparency, sustainable extraction, support of local industry, and one which eliminates waste generated by the construction or renovation of our spaces. You'll note here on this image that I-12 responsible materials has an asterisk next to it, and that is because I-12 represents the core requirement. And we kind of see that as the gateway to the materials petal as a whole. But as I go through sort of the overarching requirements, just keep that in mind. So ILFI's red list is probably the best known of the materials petals imperatives. It sparked the movement toward optimized materials beyond products that simply meet design intent and performance requirements by asking everyone from the architect to the contractor, and Mark, possibly the engineers, to ask manufacturers what's in your product. These transactions, multiplied by hundreds of projects and thousands of emails, has led to the healthier products found on our Declare marketplace and other repositories. The red list of chemicals of concern has grown from a few hundred to over 11,000 unique chemicals, and team members who engage in the request for product information, transparency, and removal of red list chemicals have the potential to change the way a product is made, not just for their use, but for everyone's use. Responsible industry turns the focus from ingredients to the product supply chain. For ILFI, this is primarily manifest in our requirements for FSC wood, but also for responsibly extracted stone to ensure forests and other ecosystems that afford us materials for use in our products and buildings are protected. Local economy sourcing is meant to help teams foster local communities and businesses while minimizing transportation impacts. Sometimes living economy sourcing can cause teams more headaches than we anticipate if a project has a remote location. And I think Stephen might address this a little bit in a few minutes. And finally, net positive waste challenges projects to reduce or eliminate the production of waste during design, construction, operation, and end of life in order to conserve natural resources and to find ways to integrate waste back into either an industrial loop or a natural nutrient loop. Today's case study, Burwood Brickworks, focuses on a 3.1 project that exemplifies what is possible when a team engages all parties in the consideration of what materials can do. While the team had slightly different requirements under the 3.1 standards materials Petal, their overall achievement still sets a high bar. Thanks to Stephen for sharing this story today, which is at a time so early in his day. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thanks, Elisa. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. I am doing my best. It's 7 a.m. from where I am. So what to say? I'm from the future. It's Tuesday, and I'll do my best to be awake. Thank you, firstly, for the invitation from the whole ILFI team, who are lovely. Lisa, the introduction, and Mark, love the project and the presentation, and what another brilliant precedent to use when we're talking to potential new clients. So I'm going to tell you a bit about a project called the Burwood Brickworks and the materials Petal. I'm happy to be interrupted, so just, if you get bored, let me know. We'll talk about something else. That's me. I'm standing on top of the building's 1.1 megawatts of solar PV. And there's quite a lot to tell you about this project. So I'll just begin at the beginning. As Lisa mentioned, it's version 3.1 of the LBC. It was certified in 2021, and it's a shopping mall. Importantly too, it's based in Australia, where we have what we call our traditional custodians. So the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the East Kulin Nation were the traditional custodians of this land, the longest living culture in the world, 60,000 years of looking after the land. And I pay my respects and gratitude to those people that looked after it for so long, that has allowed me 60,000 years later to even tell you a little bit about this project. So if you're not familiar, Australia's that little island in the bottom right-hand corner in yellow down there. And it looks like that when, if you haven't been, you may have heard of Sydney, one of the biggest city, and there you see the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House and all the boats coming into the quay. And this project is in Melbourne, which is just southwest of Sydney, which is more of a laneway style urban culture. And the project itself, Burwood, is the suburb. I'm doing a conversion here, 13 miles east of the CBD. You see the CBD in the background there. And it's a shopping mall, as I mentioned. So 13,000 square meters, I suppose that's 220,000 square feet or something. And it's got lots of things in it. There's grocery stores, pharmacy, medical center, yoga studio, dog salon, some global brands, and some independent restaurants, shops, cafes. There's a farm on the roof, complete with greenhouse and cafe on that roof. And I just want to tell you a little bit about going back to 8 years ago. That's where we accepted the challenge, so to speak. It used to be a brickworks, this site. And when we were there 8 years ago, there were no certified projects in Australia. There was no Declare program here. There was certainly no Living Product Challenge. To say limited industry knowledge would be a slight understatement. And there's no global precedent in the world for retail, not least one with so many different kinds of uses. And now this is, what it looks like. And I suppose today I just want to share some of these stories of in between. If you want to interrupt, feel free to, chuck it into the chat. I'm more than happy to, do whatever you need, really. So certain aspects of this challenge worth highlighting. We had a fixed budget and the same return on investment requirements of the development-led retail projects. So it still had to meet the same financial hurdles. We had a maximum of 18 months of construction, and that's because when you have this many tenants who have hundreds of staff who are saying they're opening on a certain date, retail projects like this can't be late. You don't really have the flexibility of saying, oh, we were just a few months or a couple of years delayed. That's not a thing. We had 40 tenants. Most at the beginning were completely unknown to us. We didn't know which kind of tenants they would be, let alone what the brands were, which means we had 40 different design teams and 40 builders, contractors. So 40 micro projects within this bigger one. We ended up with just over 2,000 different materials and products. We researched just over 6,000. And I should say it's a very public building, 2 to 3 million visits a year. So it's under a lot of scrutiny all of the time. And we can't stop people from coming here. So everyone will just turn up day and night. So how do we deal with this? Well, mainly it's for us about remembering to have fun. This is our childcare center. And when you're addressing the materials petal, you can either, take your own life, or you can think about different ways to make it, to survive, I guess. So one game that we would always play, and we played it mainly because we had a grocery store, was to think about that analogy that's so beautifully, expressed by the Living Future Institute, which is food products and building products being seen in the same light. So the game we used to play, we'd say, okay, what kind of product was this? And at lunchtime, we would only show the ingredients list. So there, let's play this game right now. Why not? I'll look in the chat box. This thing is mostly sugar, water, flour, fructose, corn syrup, egg, soybean oil, and the further you get down the list, the worse it gets. With egg, milk, soy, and wheat allergens, 280 calories per serving, which is inclusive of 62% of sugars for the day in this single serving. Not great from a any other perspective, really. Made in Kansas. You may have guessed it's this. So this kind of thing we found really helpful because it really brings on board into people's lives. Everyone in the team can access this. So we build this materials muscle. Another product, very common one here, ingredients, polyvinyl acetate emulsion, vinyl acetate monomer. If you think you know what it is, just put it in the chat box. Calcium carbonate, which I think is actually limestone, kaolin, which is a kind of clay, titanium dioxide, and so on and so on. More than 50% by weight is VOCs. pH level, which means it's more alkaline than acidic. And some of the warnings on the label could cause eye, skin, respiratory tract irritation. And if you look into the material safety data sheet, potential cancer hazard. So if you have any guesses what that would be, it's actually this. And so we do this because partly because it's fun, but also because it brings into light that, as I mentioned, the habit of doing this kind of work. So coming back to like the idea of play, a lot of questions that always come up is, how did you get 40 tenants to do this for this building with that many materials? And on reflection, it's a lot about the different motivations that people have. And we thought it would be mostly money related. Almost never was it money related. They've got lots of other different motivations, intrinsic and extrinsic, and I'd like to just share some with you. Firstly, this is a nail salon. It's a beautiful nail salon, but it also illustrates some of the challenges. Here you see we had to research the tiles, the grout between the tiles, the lighting, the powder coat on the lighting, the chairs, the foam inside the chairs, the fabric on the chairs, the little sinks that people wash their feet in and have a pedicure, the timber on the walls, the skylight in the top left corner, the air conditioning systems on the ceiling, the sculptures on the ceiling. And what was interesting about this project is really this sense of obligation is what actually made this particular tenancy come to life, because we had built this amazing fit out and I met with the owner and said, we got one problem. It's all of these things on the wall. Here we have, sorry, my screen keeps flickering. Here we have, 40 bottles of poison, essentially. And they let us do some research. We individually VOC tested every single product that they plan to use. We found that a lot of them were well above the, CDPH requirements. Sorry, I'm speaking as though you know everything I'm talking about, but feel free to put it in the chat if I'm being too technical. And we saw some research across Western Australia, which showed that I think in 87 or 90 different nail salons across the country, after 1 year, 25% of the female workers inside had become infertile. So that's obscene. And we took this research to the owner and said, look, as a developer, we cannot tell you which shellac and nail varnish you're allowed to sell. But we can tell you that 25% of the women working in these kinds of salons in these conditions have become infertile within the space of 12 months. And so they completely changed all of their products. And that was nothing about our ability to we couldn't legally do anything. We could deal with a fit out, but their sense of obligation really changed the way they approached it. And I thought that was very beautiful. The cinema was another very scary prospect for us, because again, you've got the foam inside the seats, the fabric on the seats, the carpet, the glue under the carpet, the paint on the walls, the curtains, and no windows. So it's a toxic cocktail in an enclosed environment without any natural ventilation, which is why a lot of the time you'll have a headache when you go to the cinema and you come out. So out of curiosity, the cinema owner asked us to go and test their other cinemas, which had been opened for, sometimes months, sometimes years. All of them, even after years of opening, still had very high formaldehyde and VOC levels. So they completely changed all of the interior products. The issue was some of these are very specialist. These chairs that recline, for example, not many kinds of buildings will need this. And the supplier was just saying, we're not going to change this for your one-off project. So the cinema owner, who's incredible, said, well, if you don't change it for this, we won't buy from you for any of our cinemas ever again. And that purchasing power they used was really high impact, because it meant that we were able to leverage their ability through their suppliers to actually make a change, which has now changed all of the cinemas in the whole country. And then there's the desire like to have a sense of control. If you ever watch people using bins, like it makes me want to dress up in a yellow jumpsuit and get a sword and run around killing people. But I think we obviously not allowed to do that. So we've tested many different ways of trying to control waste, both in construction and operations. So we have a 13 different waste streams. And we just followed that color coding and nomenclature all the way around the building. So this is, for example, the back of house areas, and it runs all the way into the different waste rooms where you can see the digestion unit at the back there, for example. And it just meant that you really try and remove the sense of mystery from it and say to people, you can follow colors, right? And so that's what we've been doing, and that's been really, really effective. There's also like the self-challenge. You know, a lot of people are motivated just because they, like a lot of people on this call, I imagine, just really passionate and want to see how far they can push themselves. That was particularly the case for us when we had products like taps. So in Australia, every single tap has lead in it at the beginning of this project. Not a single tap, you could not buy one legally that didn't have lead in. But when you delve into the more detail, it's even more confusing because you look at the main body of the product might be stainless steel zinc alloy. When you look into what inside the alloy, a lot of the time there are red list ingredients. If they're shiny, then that's alarm bells because it might have hexavalent chromium or chromium 6, which again on the red list. And of course, our favorite friend polyvinyl chloride is in all the fixtures and fittings. And so we, I think, contacted 200 different suppliers just of taps and went through this process with them. There's now a national inquiry into lowering the lead levels in the country. All of this kind of work coalesces into one point. And finally, we have lead-free taps on the market in Australia, but it took a very, very long time. But every single you know, tenancy in our building has a tap, like every single one. And then, you know, finally, people are often driven just by a sense of belonging. I showed you the Opera House earlier, not in Sydney, not just by chance, but because when one of the piers of the Opera House was being dismantled, we managed to acquire it. We put aside some space during the construction to store things. We didn't even know what they'd be for. Well, this is what we ended up using the Opera House pier for, all of our seating throughout the mall. And I think thinking about being really flexible about what that material might be first and then designing around it is something that I'd highly recommend, rather than designing something and then trying to find materials to shoehorn into that design, if that makes sense. Are you all still with me? I don't know if I'm talking really fast or slow. It's just too early for me to know. So looking back in hindsight, advice that we'd give to ourselves, I'd say materials for us is like a web within which everything gets caught. Health and happiness gets drawn into it a lot. But of course, every other petal, including, you know, many of the things that Mark spoke about, all gets drawn into this. And some of the advice we would give ourselves, and none of this advice is from the ILFI. It's not endorsed by the ILFI, and probably many people at the ILFI would be quite upset if I said it was. So just please bear that in mind. First mistake we made was sending people the red list. Don't do that. Don't ask suppliers what's not in their product. This is enough to you know, really put anyone off instantly, but you also lose the opportunity to learn because you don't then find out what's in the product if you're asking only what's not in the product. Love the templates, I love the tools, but this is not good for daily tracking. This is a periodic thing that we just updated, as I mentioned, periodically, because this is actually massively overwhelming, very hard to filter, and in many ways is more of a reporting tool than a tracking tool. I know it's called a tracking spreadsheet, I'm sorry. But we had a simplified version of that. It's really quite clear. There's a product type, who's the organization, what's the product name, who in our team is dealing with which contacts, and then what's the status. That's all. And that's what we used, you know, for 5 years. Key for us during the construction, and I've written communication in context there, during the construction, we hired some stock air quality monitors. You can get them quite cheaply, $200–300 in Australia, so even less where you are. And we just went around with it during the construction. And the alarm, we'd put the sound on full, and the alarm would go off anytime someone was using products that had high particulates or respirable suspended particles, different volatile organic compounds. And so you could tell very, very quickly what was going on in the construction. And that was really fantastic because we had more than 2,000 different tradespeople at any given time. Very difficult to manage that many people and so many different projects at once. So we decided to have a zero tolerance policy, which essentially meant that unfortunately, a lot of people choose to learn the hard way, but when people were using the wrong products, we sent them home unpaid. And at first, those different trades would think we were joking, saying, "Oh, you don't really mean that. It's just a thing. No one will notice." We just sent them home for the day. And that built a culture of self-policing, because when people realized we were not joking and that they definitely would be sent home, when they saw anyone else doing the wrong thing, they could anonymously report to us what they saw and who was doing it. And we would then be able to go around and go straight to that, to the perpetrator, so to speak. And we had many, many, many occasions where we sent people home, and our sort of LBC police on site were the happiest police you'll ever meet. Another advice to ourselves was to embed the rules and incentives. So this store is called The Source. For example, you have some in the US, and we had to change almost everything of the fit out that they did, because they had used timber, which was not certified. They had used different paints that were over the limit. All of the joinery was questionable. And so the only way we were able to actually functionally make a change was through the lease agreement. Now, when we started, we had a lease agreement that had a separate environmental schedule, and then you can hand that to someone saying you haven't met this environmental schedule. We changed that so that within the lease agreement, the fit out guide, the operational requirements, the Living Building Challenge requirements were all embedded into the text, line by line by myself with a lawyer. So it became very much a mainstream contract, because whether you're dealing with retail, commercial, residential, there are still rules and there's still incentives and there's still paperwork. So why not embed those into it and sort of remove the idea that this is an extra thing that they have to do? And on the flip side, you have to share the weight or the load or the burden. So we have, the country's first, public materials list, which is called Green Sheet. If you're into it, we can put some links somewhere for you afterwards or in the chat. If you want to see what products we use, they're all on there. And we used one of our empty tenancies to set up an LBC shop. So when, for example, low smoke, zero halogen cable is more expensive than PVC cable. It just costs maybe 15 to 20% more. So we bought it in bulk, and then electricians could come in and buy it by the meter. And this is just off the side to my desk. We were just working, someone would come in, and so they would only buy what they needed, much less waste, and we could sell it to them at cost price after buying it in bulk. So LBC shop, why not? And then I would say we kind of centralized the coordination for materials, but we decentralized the work. So that I don't like saying this, but the first thing that we did on this project was to fire the sustainability consultant. We didn't have one for the project, and we did that deliberately because it forced everyone, the architects, the mechanical engineers, the structural engineers, the civil, the electrical, to work it out. If we had someone on the side, a sustainability consultant, just doing the work for them, they wouldn't think very much. They would just specify whatever they wanted to. Salvaging solves so many challenges. Every single bit of hardwood in the building was salvaged because it was so much easier. One that people always get drawn to is our travelator. This is all formwork and hoarding that we had left over from different sites. So we put it on the ceiling, and we didn't clean it, as you can see, in advance because we ran out of time, and we still get complaints about that, but it actually tells a story, I think, about where all this stuff goes at the end of life. And I think it's really important to make it beautiful. But how do you make it beautiful when there's so many different requirements on us? We're thinking about red list, VOCs, net positive waste, design for disassembly, embodied carbon, and then living economy sourcing. And on top of that, how much does it cost? How long will it take to get here? Does it meet the durability requirements? It's in a very public building, and so on. And so again, in hindsight, this is how we, would intellectualize our approach. And again, this is not something that the ILFI endorsed, because in the Living Building Challenge, all of the imperatives are laid out. It doesn't say prioritize one over the other. It's do all of them. However, our approach to working with suppliers was this: is the product that we're looking to use fit for purpose? Because if it's not, don't even worry about the other stuff. It's just not even necessary to look at. Secondly, is it responsibly sourced? Again, black and white. If it's not, don't even worry if it's red list free. If it's not responsibly sourced, give up. And if it does have an internal health impact, then again, we cannot compromise on that. We then said, all right, if it meets the top 3 criteria, we're looking at the red list. We're delving down further into embodied carbon, living economy sourcing, where it comes from, and net positive waste. So this list in kind of that order is broadly our approach to shortcut a lot of the process. And I'm almost at the end, so bear with me. And I think the way I would say this list is developed is really, it's about the level of compromise from what we just will not compromise on down to there are other ways to maybe address this through advocacy, through finding other suppliers, going to 3 alternatives and so on. And then there's a way to say, if we really, really cannot get that product red list free, then what are the other criteria that we absolutely have to work on? But all of it is built on transparency. Every single part of it is built on the foundations of transparency. If you don't have transparency, don't worry about anything else. We found that if someone was not willing to be transparent about their VOCs, they probably have red list in their ingredients list too. One thing always leads to another. If you look at the food manufacturing, if someone's not telling you what's in the product, you can probably guess it's not good for you. And finally, I think storytelling is really important. This is our own irresistible staircase, and this is our lift or elevator, and we've got this kind of storytelling and signage throughout the whole project. You can get into the lift and read about bisphenol A or any of the red list ingredients, for example. The grocery store, whilst we were doing construction, they collected up all recycled milk bottles, and that's what all the trolleys are made of. So that's what you're pushing around. And a key thing that we keep hearing is, take them on the journey, work with tenants and suppliers, take them on the journey. I kind of think the opposite to that. We are kind of going on their journey, not taking them on ours. And that seems like a small philosophical thing to sort of say, but it's really about humility. Taking someone else on the journey assumes that you know more than them and that they need to come with you somewhere. Really, that's not necessarily the case. And this is a Mexican restaurant that you see in this image. We were trying to work out how we can have a dirt walk-in doormat, the width of the tenancy, because they wanted concertina doors, and they wanted the checkered floor look because that's important to them in their Mexican restaurant tenancy. So we got one of the suppliers who now has a declare label to make a checkered floor doormat. And that is really not us saying to them, you can't have it. It was us saying to them, okay, what can we do to work with you? And talking about humility, I'd say it's like watching paint dry, because in a way, 6 years of working with the biggest manufacturer of paints in Australia, a company called Dulux. And I spent more time with their lawyers than I did with their scientists. But 6 years later, although we finished the project and we can't take any credit for it, they have declare labels, and they're getting many of them this year. And so we have now over, there's been hundreds of declare labels as a result of this project. And I think, we're really, really proud of that. I think I've stopped talking now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Stephen. We have time for 2 really quick questions. And Oscar had asked a question of Mark in the beginning. Mark, if you could share a little bit about embodied carbon and sort of the outcomes of that aspect of the energy petal.
Yeah, sure. So our embodied carbon for our building, 58,000 square feet, was around 2,500 metric tons of CO2. We did an analysis looking at, you know, with our mass timber construction versus concrete and steel, what we would have been at. We found that, you know, we reduced it by about a quarter or so from the concrete and steel to our wood. And the majority of our embodied carbon was actually still in concrete in our building, so in our radiant floors. That was about a third, and then another 20% or so in steel. So those are kind of the low-hanging fruit that I think, you know, if I was doing this again, I would look for probably alternate mixes on the concrete. The concrete does a lot of things for us that work really well, but really try and look at those mixes on that to see, can we find something with less carbon intensity.
Stephen, this always comes up when we talk about the materials Petal. What about costs? Don't these healthier materials cost more? Can you speak about return on investment? You know, and how is it that we can make the case? Did they cost more for your project?
Sometimes, yes, absolutely. You know, a very well-known person said we tend to, you know, internalize the profits and socialize the costs. You know, for example, responsibly sourced timber definitely costs more, and a lot of the time we were working with people that just didn't want to use it. And I think the way that we spoke with them about it said there is no return on investment of this responsibly sourced timber from your financial perspective, because it does cost more to have timber sourced responsibly than having some slave children cutting down old growth forests in developing countries. And that is just the truth. And that's the decision that we're making on an ethical basis. In other situations, as I mentioned, cables cost more, non-PVC products might cost more. However, there's so many ways to actually neutralize that cost. And so we, for example, we redesigned a lot of the electrical reticulation because we found that a lot of the cables we wanted to use that were actually cost comparative were not as flexible. So we said, okay, well, let's just change the runs of those electrical lines so that we can get that cabling in and not have to have the flexibility of a comparable cable, which costs 10% or 15% more. So on some tenancies at the beginning were costing 10 to 12% more to build. By the end, it was cost neutral. And it depends massively on the tenancy and the level of specialty item. But in reality, healthy stuff can cost more. And sometimes you have to, what we did is not try and hide that, but celebrate it, going, yes, we're not using slave kids to cut down forests. Sorry, that's not really how I wanted to end the whole presentation, actually.
Thank you.
That was excellent. No, thank you both, Stephen and Mark, for sharing with all of us today and for your time. And thank you everyone for joining us. We will be in touch with a post-event email with CEU information, probably some resources that were mentioned today, and the webinar recording. So thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.